keep forgetting. If I could just get some quiet. Stop the machine start screaming at me. Constantly screaming in my head.
Greetings Cornerinos and welcome to a special midweek episode of Ian's VR Corner, in which I'll be reviewing the VR portion of Hitman 3. In this video I'll be covering what's good, what's bad, which parts of the game didn't really live up to expectations, which parts absolutely blew me away, and more importantly, whether or not the game is worth buying just for the VR stuff alone. So if you've been wondering how well Agent 47 deals with VR murder sprees, look no further because I've got all the details right here. If you didn't already know, Hitman VR is currently only available for PSVR on PS4. If you own any of the Hitman trilogy games on PS5, you will only be able to play them in VR if you download and run the PS4 version of the game. It's also worth noting that there is currently no way to play Hitman in VR on PC. Judging by the huge amounts of salty comments on my previous Hitman VR videos, this is obviously a sore point for a lot of VR users. But while there isn't a way to play it on PC at the moment, IO has never come out and specifically said that Hitman VR won't be coming to PC. So fingers crossed we may get to see it sometime down the road. Maybe after a period of PlayStation exclusivity or something. Right, let's kick this review off proper with a look at the visuals, because that's probably what most people are interested in hearing about. How good does Hitman look in VR when it's basically a last-gen build running on what amounts to be the lowest resolution VR headset on the market? Well, it's a mixed bag, to be honest with you. I made a video recently about the things I couldn't wait to try in VR in the Dubai level, and, well, perhaps my enthusiasm got the better of me, because a lot of the things that I hoped may happen just plain don't. The big thing here for me is the lack of reflections in the game. This is just one of many corners that have been cut to make Hitman work in VR, and while it technically doesn't affect the gameplay in any way, I do feel like it robs the game of something that would have added a real sense of presence to it. Also, due to the low resolution of the headset and the graphical limitations of the PlayStation 4, the heights are way less terrifying than I'd expected. You still feel high up when you're perched on the side of the Sceptre in Dubai, sure, but due to the reduced number of distant assets and their low resolution, it's harder to believe that you're actually there, and because of that, everything feels a lot less perilous as a result. Draw distance also takes a big hit in order to get the game running properly in VR, meaning you'll spot a lot of pop-in on distant objects, and most jarringly of all, in crowds. Once you're in a crowd, things are great, and especially on the Berlin dance floor, there's a surprisingly large amount of NPCs in play, and it makes it feel very busy. But on the approach, most rooms often look fairly empty, until the NPCs suddenly ping into existence when the game decides you're close enough to spawn them. This happens way more frequently if you're rushing through a level, but taking things at a slower pace will help minimise the people pop-in. With all that being said though, when the game is behaving itself, it is one of the best looking PSVR games I've played to date. The fabulously detailed environments of Hitman 3 look gorgeous in VR, especially the level that's set in China, which honestly left me feeling gobsmacked. The distant cityscape, the light from the neon sign shining on the rain-soaked floor, the countless buildings you can enter and explore. There were points where it felt like I was wandering around a real, living, breathing city, and at times the sense of scale to the level and the possibilities for exploration felt almost overwhelming. While most of the assets on show here are lower res than their flat counterparts, upon closer inspection, the majority of objects, be they interactive or not, look sharp and detailed, and I thoroughly enjoyed being able to get up close and personal with the huge amounts of props that decorate each level.
Oh my god, they're breathing. They're breathing.
The same too can be said for the NPCs. From a distance they can seem quite featureless, but up close and personal they're just the right scale and have just enough detail to their faces and animations to make you feel like they really are real people. I mean, your brain will definitely trick you into thinking someone is invading your personal space when they're frisking you, and if you're anything like me, you'll also be able to feel the weight of the virtual crowds as you push your way through them, thanks to just how believable it all feels when the sights and sounds all come together as one. Another noticeable cutback to the VR version is how limited 47's instinct vision is when compared to what you see in flat mode. Activate instincts in the normal version of Hitman, and the game will show you both the outlines of NPCs through walls, and it will highlight objects that you can interact with or pick up. In VR, none of those interactive objects are highlighted in Instinct's vision, and instead of the outlines of NPCs, only hostiles and your targets are shown on screen, and these are marked with simple icons only. When you factor in the lack of minimap in VR2, this limited HUD can actually make the VR version slightly harder to play, as it's difficult to know what is and isn't a tool for murder until you get close, or until you've already interacted with it. It's also a lot harder to anticipate the moves of your targets or pursuers, as you can't easily tell which way they're facing. I didn't have too many issues with this as I played the pancake version first, and this meant I already knew the layout for each level, but anyone who dives into VR straight away may struggle to plan a successful assassination without doing a lot of trial runs first.
What?
Another massive bone of contention for Hitman VR has been its controversial control scheme. Instead of plumping for motion controls with twin move controllers or a relatively simple DualShock 4 control scheme like that of Resident Evil 7, Hitman in VR opts for a hybrid of both. It's an odd choice and it definitely has its ups and downs, but basically put, you control the majority of 47 with normal controller movements, but his murderous right arm is motion controlled using the light bar on the DualShock. Moving around the levels with the thumbsticks is pretty easy, and veteran assassins should have no problems with that at all, even though some of the button placements have been shuffled around slightly in order to account for VR. Performing most environmental kills or interacting with objects is done by a quick press of a face button, while R1 will allow you to pick things up from a distance, which is great if you're playing seated, or to drag and dump bodies. Aiming guns and melee combat is done via the aforementioned motion controls though, and it's important to know that this means you can't use a DualSense if you're playing on PlayStation 5, as this scheme relies on the DualShock's light bar for tracking. It's an interesting approach, but it often feels rather wonky, especially as it makes 47 wander around with one arm outstretched limply at all times. The below-par tracking of the PSVR makes aiming down the sights of guns quite inaccurate, and using 47's new camera gadget is especially aggravating, as you have to mash the controller right up into your face in order to activate it, and in moments of high action, it's not rare to find the game getting quite confused about where your hands are supposed to be. One incorrectly tracked move combined with a quick physical turn, and if you're not careful, the next thing you know, your elbow will be protruding right out of the side of your nose. The imprecise nature of these controls can really mess with the immersion at times, and this is a big shame because it's frustrating to see your well-laid plans go down the toilet just because your wrist has suddenly developed a life of its own. Thankfully, it's easy enough to reset your character model with a quick hold of the options button or a big shake of your controller, but it would be nice to think that, if a future PC VR port does come out, it will include full motion control support that takes advantage of the improved tracking on PC platforms. And this all leads me to the most important part of VR of all, the immersion, and this is where Hitman VR really shines. I've touched on how things can be a bit sparse graphically, but even then the detail to the levels that IO has created means it's so easy to get lost in them and feel like you're really living in them. The level set in China, for instance, has these tall walkways at the start, and from them you can see into people's living rooms to see what they've got on their dinner table. You can lean over the railings and watch trains and cable cars go by. You can wander through an old arcade or go check out the menu in a restaurant. There are thousands of these little details that all combine to bring the levels bursting to life. Berlin's club is probably my favourite place to inhabit in VR though. It's set in an underground club which is built on the ruins of an old power station, and it provides an experience which feels incredibly authentic. Walking through the entrance corridor, through some dingy halls, and then heading down the stairs, all whilst hearing the pumping bass get louder and louder, felt just like going to a real club. Or at least what I remember going to a club in the before times felt like. Again, from a distance, the crowds weren't huge here, but when I actually reached the dance floor and stood in the middle of the revelers, feeling the bass in my hands through the vibrations of my DualShock, I couldn't help but lose myself in the moment, and I started pumping my fist to the beat of the music. It really was a wonderful experience, and each level has so many of these great little touches that translate super well to VR. Similarly, combat, when you're not struggling with the motion controls, can be utterly intoxicating. Hunting a target, or indeed being on the receiving end of a hunting yourself, is so much more intense in VR because it feels like you're actually there. Leaning around corners to catch a glimpse of your prey, ducking behind cover to avoid a hostile guard. It's all way more tense in first person than it is in third. Grabbing and choking out your targets can be a bit hit and miss due to the unreliability of the motion controls mind, but holy crap, when I went guns free to escape a secret research facility in the China level, my heart was in my mouth the entire time, and I thoroughly felt like the unstoppable, unfeeling killing machine that 47 is meant to be. These playgrounds are perfect places to practice chaos, but more than that, they are meticulously crafted virtual worlds that feel both alive and lived in, and to have achieved this, even with the limitations of the PSVR, is quite the accomplishment.
Command! Command! You there? Someone's causing panic.
Hitman VR then is a top-notch virtual reality experience. Sure, it's scrappy and clumsy at times, but when it hits its mark, you can easily lose yourself inside it for hours at a time. Its wonderfully detailed sandbox levels provide countless opportunities for experimentation, and this freedom only accentuates the immersive nature of the gameplay, letting you truly feel like you are part of the game world that IO has created. Don't turn your nose up at it just because it's on PSVR or just because you can't use twin move controllers, because you're missing out on something special if you have the means to play it but are holding off due to those reasons. Yes, there's a big graphical downgrade from the flat version, and yes, the wonkiness of the control scheme can be immersion breaking at times, but the sense of presence from the incredible level design and mission structures more than makes up for it in the long run. Personally, I've enjoyed my time with Hitman VR so much that I'm not sure if I ever want to play the game in flat mode ever again, even with the VR flaws. But for anyone thinking about buying the game just for VR, I would suggest perhaps doing some practice runs of each level in flat mode first before you jump in, just to balance out the lack of HUD info once you play.
Montgomery, I need a report. Montgomery.
It's really a bit early to name a PSVR Game of the Year yet, seeing as it's like halfway through January and all, but aside from maybe a surprise PSVR announcement for Resident Evil 8, I find it hard to imagine anything beating this game in terms of scale or fun factor. So get it on your face!
Crystal Dawn won't be happy.
Excuse me. You are blowing cancer directly into my body.
It's a smoking area. If you don't like it, piss off.
Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this review of Hitman VR, why not check out our review of the flat version of Hitman 3 as well, which is on screen and clickable right now. Oh, and make sure to subscribe to this channel as well, because we've got some very fun Hitman VR videos in the works for you, the first of which is due this Sunday. Goodbye and good Hitmansings.